Welcome to episode 19 of the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. I'm your co-host Isaiah Bollinger of Trellis, and I'm here with Tim.
Hi, I'm Timothy Peterson, also working with the wonderful folks at Trellis. Welcome. I'd like to give a special mention to our sponsor, PunchOut2Go. They're a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. And PunchOut2Go's iPaaS technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. And with their solution, you can immediately reduce integration complexities for PunchOut catalogs, electronic purchase orders, invoices, and other B2B sales order automation documents. Thank you to our sponsor, PunchOut2Go, and welcome once again to the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. Back to you, Isaiah.
Thank you, and definitely excited to announce our guest, Michael Noble. I think I first met you when you first started Apruve. Like it might have been the first year that you had just started, so it was still I wasn't really sure where it was going to go, but I knew there was something there. And you've been on our list as someone we wanted to bring on because you guys are very focused on B2B and in an interesting element of B2B, which is kind of the financing and automating around financing, accounts receivable, and all the complexity around that. So thanks for joining us, Michael. And yeah, please expand on kind of your background because I don't think I can do that justice. So.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We probably weren't sure where it was going to go either, so you weren't alone in doing a startup. Yeah, my background personally, I've been doing tech startups for a while. A long time ago in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was a part of LimeWire, which was a big peer-to-peer file sharing network, kind of post-Napster world. And then I went to a company called Zanbu, which these were both in New York City. Motorola was our lead investor, and that company was sold to AT&T. It was kind of on the early stage of the Internet of Things, the IoT movement, the very early stages. And yeah, we started Apruve here in Minneapolis a while ago. And, we are a platform to manage credit programs for manufacturers, wholesalers, marketplaces. We definitely started online in e-commerce. We've expanded that to manage these programs offline as well. And it's essentially one part process efficiency where we're providing end-to-end credit management automation by automating all the typical AR stuff from underwriting to a buyer portal to invoicing and payment. And then we link into third-party lenders that can pay out those invoices nightly. So if we use Visa a lot as an analogy. So in the credit card world, Visa is this middle layer that sits between a buyer, a seller, and a bank. Mm-hmm. And when you use your credit card at a restaurant or a grocery store, a lot of people don't realize it, but they're not actually paying the grocery store. It feels like you are, but it's Wells Fargo or Chase or US Bank. And the value that brings to the grocery store is they don't have to underwrite you. They don't have to take risk on your transaction. They don't have to wait 30 days to get $30 from you. The bank pays them immediately, and they pay a fee in the credit card world called interchange to do that. 30 days later, you go and pay your bill through Chase. So we are very similar. We're an API first company. So we plug into e-commerce, ERP, or EDI frameworks, capturing those orders, validating credit lines. As products ship, we generate the invoice off of that. We're managing that invoice electronically with the customer, and then we're routing that invoice behind the scenes to one of the lenders in our network, and they pay our merchant nightly for all invoices generated that previous day. Our largest customer is Texas Instruments. Boxed is another big e-commerce one. We just went live on Monday with Stocked, which is a brand and a marketplace for healthcare supplies. It's owned by Premier, which is $1.5 billion GPO in the healthcare supply space. We are global, so we manage transactions in multi-currency, US, UK, Canada, EU, and most recently, as of last week, China. So yeah, we're definitely solving some pain for some customers out there.
I have a question around just for, because our audience might be anywhere from the very sophisticated e-commerce person to someone that's kind of new to this stuff. So someone that maybe is a little bit newer and they see like Klarna and Affirm, I'm sure you're aware of all these other payment options or pay later options. Like how would you kind of like simplify the message of why this is very different from, the Klarnas and the Affirms of the world? And I'm sure there's a million others now.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest difference is a consumer, a person is not a business. And the way that lenders look at risk and underwriting is different for an individual versus a business. They're very different reporting, different credit bureaus that are used, different data sets and data points to manage fraud. All of that changes when you are looking at a business buyer persona versus a consumer persona, which is where the kind of Klarnas and Affirms live.
Gotcha. So they're very focused on the, what's your credit score, credit history as a person, whereas a business, it's a little more complicated because they might have personal credit scores within the owners, but it, can get a lot more complicated than that in terms of how the business is structured and the value.
Yeah, and credit in general is different as well. So a lot of those on the consumer side, the product they sell is what we call pay over time. So it's like buy a mattress and pay for it in $100 installments, right? In the business world, the tool for doing business often is a purchase order, and you need to be invoiced on net terms. So, a big difference between a consumer and a business, a consumer may shop with a specific brand once, twice. I buy 2 pairs of shoes a year from Zappos, or whatever it would be. In a business, the entire goal to, as your supplier, is to incentivize purchase frequency and make it as easy as possible for you to check out or buy from me and be invoiced later on terms. So setting you up with a corporate account, which is a way to say I'm going to give you a credit limit to buy against, is a sales tool. It allows you, it's harder to go to my competitor if I'm giving you an account to purchase against.
Yeah,
The problem,
it's a competitive advantage, essentially.
Absolutely. So that's one side on the competitive. The other is, I think, I don't know if I can share per merchant data, but we see our customers' orders through Apruve are factors times larger than credit card orders.
Wow.
and factors times more frequent.
So let me interject for a second and ask about that, because that was going to be something I brought up later. So obviously businesses are different than just, as you said, consumers buying a pair of shoes or a mattress, but is the range really into the millions, the tens of millions, depending on approvals? I mean, let's say I'm buying parts, for a retooling of a factory or something, it really can be at that level for the right businesses.
Yeah, I mean, our largest credit line that we have out today for a single buyer is $2.5 million on a 30-day term.
And that's for Trellis, right? I mean, I just wanted to make
sure. But that's more of an anomaly.
Got it.
The average, if you're buying supplies, like if you're buying semiconductors from TI, right? I'm an OEM manufacturer that builds a part.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a brand typically. I'm not Tesla. I'm the 10 guys who build something that goes into something, which goes into something else, which goes into a Tesla.
Sure.
Yeah. right? And so every week, every day, I'm buying chips to build my motherboard and or whatever it is. That's who TI sells to. That's their end customer. With Stocked this week, the end customer is a hospital, a clinic, long-term care, rehab center. They're constantly buying supplies, right? So they have this kind of order frequency and order cadence where having a standing account, being billed on net terms just makes a ton of sense. And credit cards just aren't used. They are not part of the procurement framework at a hospital. Like their process is to use POs. Like that's it. They have to do it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that though. What's interesting is we have a large healthcare client. I don't necessarily want to mention them by name because I'm not sure if I get in trouble doing that. But it's all POs and very PO driven. It's such a pain to get a PO or a new PO. But they actually pay by credit card once you get the PO, which is kind of interesting. I thought that was a funny thing that they ended up.
Yeah, I mean that is interesting and kind of a no-no for most lenders in our world. It's you're paying debt with more debt, and you're increasing fraud probability quite a bit, and all that other fun stuff that comes with.
There might be some magic going behind the scenes that they do that who knows that I'm not aware of, but I thought that was funny. But yeah, this makes a lot of sense, where you guys have developed this niche. So, we talked before the podcast about how that's evolved into many things, and part of that is B2B e-commerce. And obviously that is the goal of our podcast, to educate people on B2B e-commerce. So can you talk a little bit about that and what you're seeing in that world, and how you guys are impacting the e-commerce world?
Yeah, I think if you launch a B2B site and you offer credit cards and PayPal, you're not going to be successful in your goals of moving your customers into a more self-service environment. If they've been paying on terms for the last 10 years and your sales guy calls them and says, "Hey, use our new magic website," and they get to checkout and they're given a credit card option, and that guy's been invoiced for years, you'd be like, what's going on here, dude? So, for a lot of companies, it's almost table stakes to have something like this. And, you can think of a tool like ours almost like a payment method, because when you bring in financing, you're paid out nightly, just like you would be for a credit card. And for e-commerce, if you're looking to grow that channel, the last thing you want to also grow is an AR team with humans doing clunky, slow stuff that doesn't equate to a digital, sophisticated, modern experience.
Yeah.
So we are a tool to plug in to allow for that growth in the e-commerce channel without adding back office costs, risk, right? I mean, if you're building a B2B site, like the last thing you want to do is manage stuff that isn't core to you figuring out how to grow this site.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. Well, yeah, that's something that we try and educate people on. Is like one of the reasons. Like, I think that's a really good point you brought up. Is like most in B2B, it's all heavily offline, or it's been heavily offline until more recently, and so they're used to buying and getting an invoice and paying net 30 or net 60 or some sort of terms, and then if all of a sudden they go online and they don't get that same kind of experience, why would you buy online? You're going to just call up again. So they lose the value of the whole site. So that's something that we try and tell people is like, figure out how to like get to parity of like what it was like buying. So a lot of times like pricing will be wrong, or the pricing won't be the same as their contract pricing. And it's like, of course you're not going to buy if you don't have the right pricing or the correct pricing, but people might overlook the fact that it's also the terms and the convenience of those terms that make it valuable to buy online.
Yep.
So just a related question, I guess. Are you guys also involved or connected to companies in business lending, as opposed to specifically what Apruve is up to? So like a business loan of $2.5 million.
No.
Okay.
Yep. So we are, think of us like it's like TI is issuing private label TI credit cards,
Mm-hmm.
but there is no card, right? So orders are placed through e-commerce.
Mm-hmm.
So the credit lines that we are giving to an individual are only allowed there. It's a one-to-one relationship. So you can't go and spend that somewhere else.
Okay.
It's designed only to be spent with TI. And that really mimics how the real world in B2B works. Like when you add a new supplier, you get an account set up, you go through a credit application, they give you a credit limit.
Mm.
So, a blanket credit line, like if a cabbage or something like that, like here's 50 grand, go spend it however you want. That's not what we do. So that's what they did. And that's why they just sold for less than their last valuation. Anyway, I digress.
No, but you could see why even, I've had my own small businesses and I've worked with a lot of small to medium size and enterprise. And it's interesting how many different variations on a theme there are, because at one point, one of my businesses, we were incentivized to have, Amex corporate cards for all of our people, right? But part of the incentive is like, well, you do this, and then you have these business loans that are available to you through Amex, and then you do X, Y, and Z, right? So you could see why when you mention why in business, why would people be doing this credit card stuff? But part of it was also in the smaller side of the businesses. They're like, well, you get these corporate cards and you get the loan, so you have to like, how do you do this? You go in an endless loop, like to work in the Amex system, and to break out of it is something else, that you have to think of.
Yep.
So let me just kind of break it down for someone that's not familiar with this at a basic level. I just want to make sure I even understand it well. Let's say I have my, Magento site or my custom site or my BigCommerce site or whatever it is, Insight, all these B2B platforms like Insight. What doesn't really matter, right? Like you have a site and you're like, we got to figure out a better, process for payments because not everyone wants to buy credit cards and people don't want to place 50 grand credit card orders. And you could do purchase order on the website, but then it's kind of like, well, then what happens? Then you have to go to the AR team and it's like, you have to reconcile that with the ERP. And it's like, and a lot of that's happening today. So they go to you, install Apruve or integrate Apruve, however that may work, whether it's an app or I'm sure you have many different ways to make that work depending on their situation. And then now I go to checkout and I get, or do I apply through Apruve when I log in and get my credit limit on my e-commerce account, or what's that process like? Like that's the first time.
Yeah. So yeah, we are API first, so we are integrating to e-commerce sites. We do have some established plugins for various platforms out there, but we also do a lot of custom work. Onboarding a buyer is it's a conversation that gets flushed out during our sales process, but there's essentially two ways. One is to go through an online credit application. And this then gets routed to the right lending partner in our network, and they're making a credit decision and getting back to you. That process can be instant if the data lines up. If it doesn't, it can take up to 24 hours. The second way we onboard is with existing data. So if you have a customer base with 12 plus months of purchasing and repayment history, we use that data and do fancy math on it to come up with underwriting criteria.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on who our lender is, they can underwrite portfolios versus buyer by buyer. Mm-hmm. And we can basically take snap a chalk line and write a check to the merchant and onboard those customers into Apruve. So that customer experience is pretty awesome because you're eliminating some of the friction that's going through a credit application. And that's another way to really kind of juice an e-commerce strategy as well.
I like that.
Be like, hey, we're using Apruve to manage our invoicing and credit program. We now have this online buyer portal. You can pay electronically. All your invoices are electronic. And oh, by the way, it works on our new e-commerce site. So they can continue to buy offline, and we'll be managing it and financing it and giving the merchant the same benefit. But if one of their goals is to build out their e-commerce strategy, we become a tool to kind of grease the wheels a little bit, and get those buyers, position those buyers in an easier way for them to buy online, if that makes sense.
So that makes a lot of sense. So let's say you're a mid-sized distributor, kind of middle of the road B2B company or manufacturer, doesn't really matter. You could say, all right, Apruve, here's my 1,000 stable customers. Let's get them all onboarded. Now they can all use the site, and they have the Apruve login or the Apruve credit limit automatically because you've done that, kind of backwards math on their history, and so they can get all onboarded and start using the website. And then new customers that come on, they might have to go through the click and apply, basically. Is that
correct?
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense.
So that data is super valuable. Like for a net new customer without that purchase history, our lenders are looking at basic stuff, right? A D&B score, an experience score, LexisNexis, like all these databases that are highly dependent on self-reporting from other suppliers. Whereas, this really interesting data set between a buyer and a seller already exists. And, there's risk on the buyer that we can ascertain, but there's also this really interesting relationship that, you can build models around and really figure out how you want to score that individual or score that portfolio.
So if you're scoring an individual, let's say somebody is, has made it to Apruve, at a certain level with a particular merchant, do you then do anything just with that data to try and find other merchants that they're just, to match to them, or is that allowed, or is that something you request?
We do not do that. We do have buyers that are using Apruve with multiple suppliers.
That's where I was going. Yeah.
Correct. So that exists, and it's all, they pay all their invoices through one portal. You can divide them by different suppliers, but we don't actively engage in cross marketing, and that's on purpose. So
that's cool. That's cool.
Yep. No, that is by design, and the data that we have can be used in aggregate. So we hope to someday be a contributor to the risk algorithms that are out there based on what we're seeing, but we don't take individualized data points and merchants and match them and say, hey, you should also use this guy. So that's something we just don't do and don't allow.
I guess a follow-up just really quickly is that you also don't do it just from the consumer perspective in the way that like Klarna and Afterpay and all these others have merchant marketplaces, right? You don't, you're approved in one so you can shop in all. You don't do that.
No, and that's just so there is an approach to that I think some companies have taken, and our approach has been TI wants us to service their customer, not to take their customer and have them do other things, right? Yep. So we're really trying to be, one-to-one focused between that buyer and seller relationship and making that as strong as possible, not broadening that buyer's perspective of the world, I guess.
Excellent.
So going back into kind of B2B e-commerce, we've talked a lot about the value of what you guys bring with financing, which makes a lot of sense. I think this is something that every B2B company should be thinking about with e-commerce is you can't just build the site. You have to think about what's the back end of how they're buying and make it more attractive them to get them to buy more. So you mentioned, before we started the podcast, as we were kind of catching up, that you guys have started to go a little bit more up market for various reasons. But what are you seeing kind of in the B2B e-commerce market, and especially as you guys have gone up market, like are there certain things that the larger companies are doing better or that some of the smaller companies should be thinking about? Um,
I think with larger the successful larger customers that we have C-level visibility to their project. So there's an investment from the top down, and that makes it less throwaway, and everybody's on board making this happen for a very specific reason, which is to drive more sales through or drive more customers through a self-service channel. And that kind of self-service automation mentality is going through enterprises, both big and small. It should be, at least. We had a prospect call last week with a new online marketplace, and they just got funded, and they're really doing great, and it's got huge potential. And they thought about doing what we do themselves, and I'm just like, why in God's name would you ever do it? Build out an AR team, learn how to do underwriting, take on risk, manage invoicing, when what you do is not that, right? And so there's a lot of companies across the spectrum that are constantly coming to aha moments about what they want to be good at and not good at. And I think within e-commerce, you need to decide what your goals are, and we're a tool for growth, and it's totally hands off. It's end to end. You don't want to touch it. You don't want to deal with this stuff. And we come in and kind of make that happen. And you can focus on servicing your customers, building the best user experience possible, and making e-commerce a prominent channel for your company.
Yeah, I think what you said is really important around the self-service portal, because I think that makes a lot of sense. Like the companies that are doing well in this space are at the top down level are thinking, hey, we got to get more efficient with our operations. And if customers' behavior, they want to be able to go and do things themselves, we take off all the cost of entering orders and put it on them, which they're happy to do anyways. And we can automate all the other processes behind that and make it great for them. Like you're becoming kind of like a much more efficient, automated company that has a lot more value, I guess is how I would put it. But the companies that aren't quite thinking at that level of sophistication might struggle with it, because they might just, hey, I want an e-commerce site because I think I need it, but they're not really thinking about like why are we really doing this? And I think in B2B, it's a little bit different from B2C, where B2C, it's more, and obviously both have customer acquisition. B2C has got a lot of, I think it's more customer acquisition, in B2C, you're like on Facebook and Google and you're constantly trying to acquire customers. Whereas with B2B, you can do that. But I think more importantly, if you focus on the automation and the operations to make it easier for your existing customers, then it's easier to sell new customers, because you're like, look how awesome it is to buy from us and how much better it is than our competitors.
Yeah, I mean, most of the successful e-commerce teams we work with are, unlike everyone else, or just like everyone else, trying to make their customers happy, and that involves, their day-to-day is like research on the site, heat maps, how can I make 3 clicks 2 clicks, product information, product mix, pricing, right? The things that you've hinted at too. Like that's their role in e-commerce. Their role is not financing. Their role is not collect on an invoice, right? Like that's not what they want to do.
Yeah.
They know it's a tool that is useful, and they should be looking at a vendor to manage that.
So I think one of the one of our favorite topics in this podcast has been asking about B2B, B2C, the duality, what people learn in one way or another, right? So I guess I would ask you, really, either side of the coin, is there Are there things that really B2B e-commerce merchants still can learn from B2C, specifically in your area, or the alternative, right? Are there things that people in B2C should be thinking about based on what you're up to, mostly for B2B players?
For me, it's marketing. B2C is its own world. I don't understand it as much. In B2B, you either need to figure out how to, at its core, save your customer money or make them money in some way, shape, or form. If your value proposition doesn't start and end there, regardless of what you're selling, regardless of who you're selling it to, for me, that's core B2B, because there's just a much more bottom line driven than wear these jeans because they're cool in the B2C space. So there's ROI in our pitch. There needs to be ROI with why I'm asking you to use my e-commerce site. Why is it better for you? Why is it going to help your business become more successful, more efficient? These are pretty generic things for B2B, but it's the big differentiator between B2B and B2C in my mind is just marketing.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about what you said with the saving costs, because I think that historically companies have focused too much on, or not maybe historically it did make sense to focus a lot on, like, let's get our products to be cheaper and more cost effective than our competitors, especially if you're in distribution where you're not necessarily the manufacturer and you're just trying to get the best price out to people, but also in manufacturing. But I think now the market has shifted. Like, people have a better sense of the value of their time, and if it's hard to order and it's time consuming to order via the call, then you got to like call them to check on your order, and then you got to like find out if it's been shipped, and then all this time that goes into placing an order. Like, if you can save all that time through e-commerce, you're saving them money, but you know what I mean? Like, it's not as clear cut, obviously, because it's not like, hey, I'm saving money on this product. But I think that's where there's a lot of adoption to be gained, is saving the customer's time, which is essentially their money.
Yeah, I mean, there's 1,000 ways to look at ROI, right? Other than just dollars. Another really nice one that I love about e-commerce is data. If someone calls you and places their order, calls their rep, and that order goes into NetSuite or SAP or something.
Yeah.
What did you learn about how that customer decided to buy that thing? Almost nothing, right? Whereas an e-commerce site, you could have seen what they searched for. You could have seen what they clicked on prior to that. You could have seen what they took out of their cart. You could have understood that that was a repeat order that happens. They do it every week on this day of this size, and it just keeps happening, right? And that data becomes interesting for you to build new strategies around, to find new customers, to optimize that person's experience, which also probably optimizes others.
Mm-hmm.
And that data, you are not going to get it by someone sending you an order with EDI or calling their sales rep or whatever it is. Zero insight.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point to make, is that, in theory, if you could get, and we actually had a person on who, they had built a custom site, a company in Panama, actually. He had basically gotten their old school kind of family business from offline, and then coronavirus, they accelerated everything, and they're like, we can't do showrooms. Got all the orders to the website. Like, I think they're doing 100%, he said, on the website. You can do that in theory, which is obviously not easy to get 100%. You have this like massive value of data that you could be using to kind of upsell, and you could use much better account management strategies, because you could look at all your customers and say, oh, well, you ordered this, and segment the data and figure out what you think you should be doing to kind of upsell them.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
It also, in my experience too, once you start getting B2B e-commerce right, it's caused some players, depending on the space they're in, to to B2C, right? You learn so much about your customers and what they're doing with your products, or or maybe even a service, and you end up, finding a path to B2C as well. So it's just great. It's great altogether to get that data in any way that you can.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you touched on some really, really valuable things, I think, that people might not be thinking about. But what are you guys kind of seeing as the evolution on the e-commerce side? Not just with what you're doing, but you get some insight into some of these more sophisticated companies. Like, what do you see as the next 5-10 years? Yeah, I know it's hard to predict, but
where will you be in 2030? I guess.
Yeah.
Right? Where will you be?
Is it going to be robots taking over, or
Robots.
Maybe, well, I know no one has this conversation without talking about Amazon, so that's obviously out there from a B2B standpoint. But e-commerce allows a manufacturer to go around a distributor and sell direct, and in a much more easy way, and this gives them more visibility into their supply chain. That's probably the biggest benefit. Obviously, margin sales, increasing margin is another one, but the supply chain visibility is huge, right? So if you used to sell $1 million worth of a million widgets to a distributor, and then that distributor sold, that million widgets to 1,000 customers, and you had no idea who those 1,000 customers are, you're not getting the data we just talked about. You're not understanding the end use of your product as well when it goes through the distributor. So e-commerce is a vehicle for manufacturers to circumvent a distributor. And it also involves fulfillment, right? So there's you're now all of a sudden you can't ship 1 million widgets. You have to ship a smaller lot of widgets. So you're taking on a number of challenges, but I believe e-commerce will be a tool that will allow manufacturers to really disrupt the distribution world in various verticals. I don't know which ones, but I think that's a trend you're going to continue to see.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. And I think that's where everyone needs to kind of innovate. Basically, I think what you're saying, and I agree, is that e-commerce is going to reduce the, from creation to consumer, like that path historically was like manufacturer, then like a bunch of distribution layers, then to the retailer, then to the consumer. And I think you're going to see a lot of that, whether it's manufacturer straight to the consumer, or maybe it's manufacturer to distributor, who distributors might have to evolve and go straight to consumer, and then less kind of that other layer of retail below them,
Yeah, I mean,
they might become the retailers,
B2B is what they always say, it's like 10 years behind B2C. And so in B2C, you've already seen this play out, right? With every specialty brand of underwear, jeans, shoes, like whatever, that has decided to own their own supply chain. And their brand is a part of that. It's we manufacture this, and it comes right from our warehouse to you. We're not going through Target. We're not going through Walmart. You buy it from us, and we're giving you the best price. We have the best quality control. We have, et cetera, with this more direct line of sight supply chain. So that trend will continue, I believe, in B2B, over the next 10 to 20 years.
I mean, one conversation that I had recently, and Isaiah might be aware of this, but I'll just bring it up. I've done some fashion tech and worked with a number of companies in that space. And, Nike, bringing things, direct to the consumer, Gucci, brands that are well known and have done a whole variety of different things. But one of the things that's happened in the last year or two, Nike is a great example, is they were setting up shops, pre-COVID, where you can get completely customized product live. So they had all the machinery available, the pieces of leather and canvas and whatever else they needed available. And you worked with somebody there and had your product made in front of you. live and paid for it and left. So it's just like a fascinating, thing in a way. It's like it does go back to something that's really a 19th century idea in some sense, right? But it's so immediate and so clear that you can do that. There's no reason that there aren't B2B applications for this as well, right? I mean, it makes perfect sense that if I need certain things to happen, it goes back to what you like Internet of Things, right? Which you brought up earlier today. You could be making things directly in your space, right, as needed, and then paying for them as needed.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this evolves in the next 5-10 years. We're going to see I think 3D printing too. I'd like to see that kind of evolve more in the US, because potentially we could bring back some of the manufacturing if it can just be all done on demand, as like you said, as needed. If they can 3D print one-offs, they don't need to stock 1,000 and wait for 1,000 people to buy. They could just kind of print it on demand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I suppose another question, just it is sort of future oriented, but just another question in my mind. It really is about the way money works. I was thinking about this in connection to our conversation here, because so many of us have talked with Bitcoin people and how blockchain technology works, all of this stuff. So where do you see the virtualization of money going, right? I mean, this is kind of a very big question, but it's really the idea that I'm using my phone for Apple Pay, especially during COVID, probably 75% of the time if I go anywhere physically, as opposed to using even a card and tapping it, or using cash, which I never use anymore, right? I mean, so the virtualization of money and just the way that works in the economy. Do you have anything to say from that on that topic?
I honestly don't know if I have much to say, unfortunately.
That's all right. It's a big thing, right?
I personally think Bitcoin's a joke,
Yeah.
and I don't buy into it. I understand blockchain as a technology to be used for lots of things, but a virtual currency that's valued by a market full of wolves and whatnot is not what I would call a fair currency in this market. So I also have issues with the mining of Bitcoin and the environmental impact of said practice and whatnot. So I don't have a ton. I don't believe it's going to be ubiquitous anytime soon. Our governments are way too powerful and embedded in the current currency landscape, and I don't think they're going to have it. I mean, so you could argue it'll exist on the black market still, which continues to more or less devalue and criminalize what they're doing. But I obviously could be wrong. There's lots of smart investors putting gajillions of dollars into these companies. So, they're all making money off each other in some way, shape, or form. But I doubt Apruve is going to be accepting Bitcoin in the near future.
Well, I think the digitization, oh man, I can't even say it. Digitalization of currency is going to happen regardless of whether it's Bitcoin or not. So I don't think, I actually agree. I was big into Bitcoin when it first came out. And I still think it's interesting in the blockchain, but I think it's just, they have too many problems with the transaction speed and to be used at the rate that we need it to be used. But I think we're still going to probably move pretty soon to a cashless society, but it's just, whether it's US dollars or something new in the future, or it's controlled by a government or not controlled by a government, it'll be something. I think cash just, it's so inefficient. You can't track it. I just think it's kind of going away, regardless of Bitcoin or not,
There's an unfortunate side to Apruve's world in the U.S. only. Are paper checks still a method of payment for invoices? And we I mean, without joking, I've been on phone calls with people in accounts payable departments where I'm like, you see those numbers on the bottom of your check. I'm like, type them into these little boxes on this page.
Mm-hmm.
No, can't do that. That's just not our process, and that's not how we do something. So I'm just gonna stick it in the mail, and you'll get it in like maybe 5 days or whatever. I mean, it's mind blowing. No other country in the world, developed country, maybe even undeveloped, uses paper checks. And I do not understand why it hasn't died a horrible death yet. There's got to be.
I love that you say that because, our personal accounts receivable, there's nothing more frustrating than, oh, well, it's in the mail, oh, we got lost in the mail and we got to send the new check over. And it's like, you realize we use QuickBooks because, we're not a massive company. It works well for us. It's like, you can literally do ACH payment, set it up. Once you set it up, you just hit click pay, a 1-second button. Like, it couldn't be more efficient to pay us.
It is a bizarre thing, for, at the consumer level as well as the business level. I mean, we've all been caught up in the same drama, but I've even had personal interactions like with a landscaper or a home repair person where they refuse to accept anything except a paper check. And I'm like, where's my checkbook? I've had used it in like the last 8 weeks. So, it becomes a completely bizarre thing that there's that piece of the economy that's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's an old data point. I don't know what year, but in the last 5 years, it was something like 20 billion checks were written in the U.S.
I believe it.
Consumer and business.
Oh my God! Wow. Well, hopefully, you guys are one step closer to digitizing things. Whether regardless of Bitcoin or not, I think we're moving in that direction. I want to be conscious of your time since we scheduled this for 1 p.m. But any last kind of remarks for someone or advice you have for I think especially people that are maybe in the smaller, earlier stages of e-commerce and B2B. What advice would you give them if they're kind of maybe in the first few years of the journey?
I would just say focus on what you want to be good at, which is, making your customers happy and servicing them. And that's like any business, that's a continual process. And, use your e-commerce strategy as a way to really dial in that value prop to your customer. And yeah, do what you want to do and don't do the stuff that you don't want to be good at. That's a lot of where there's lots of various services like us, like Trellis, like Apruve, that are there to help your business.
Yeah.
So
I like that advice. So to summarize, if you're, whether small or big, focus on your expertise. And if you don't want to be the best accounts receivable company in the world, hire Apruve.
right.
If you don't want to be the best development company, hire Trellis. If you don't want to be the best, integration company, get Punch Out to Go, right?
Mm-hmm.
And bring all those things in, and then focus on where you're selling medical supplies. Get the best of that.
Yep.
Good advice. Good advice. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today on the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. It's really been a pleasure having you. And Isaiah, any other?
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like I just learned so much about financing. I feel like I'm almost an expert today.
Thanks, guys. No, happy to join you.
Yeah,
Pleasure.
Okay.
All right.